A mother is heartbroken when her own daughter bans her from her wedding day, choosing her new man over the woman who raised her. But the mother holds a devastating secret about the groom, a secret she decides to reveal in a single, elegantly written letter. Less than 12 hours after they say "I do," the groom is on her doorstep, his perfect life shattered, proving that a mother's love is one thing, but a mother's wrath is something else entirely. Hello and welcome back to our channel. Before we get into this incredible story, please take a second to like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. And tell us in the comments what city or state you're watching from today. The sun was shining. Of all the cruel ironies the world could muster, the brilliant, cloudless sky on my daughter's wedding day felt the most personal. I sat in my quiet living room, the silence a stark contrast to the joyous celebration happening just 5 miles away. A celebration I was forbidden to attend. On the mantelpiece sat a framed photo of Lisa as a little girl, her gap-toothed smile beaming, her arms wrapped around my neck in a fierce hug. I had been her world then, her hero. Now I was an inconvenience, an obstacle to her perfect day. The pain was a physical thing, a heavy, cold stone in the center of my chest. My only child was getting married, and I was uninvited. The final brutal conversation had happened a week ago. Lisa had come over, her face tense, unable to meet my eyes. "Mom," she'd started, her voice barely a whisper. "Mark and I have been talking, and we've decided it would be best if you didn't come to the wedding." I remember the world tilting slightly. "Best for who, Lisa?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "For us," she'd mumbled, finally looking at me with a mixture of defiance and shame. "Mark feels you're critical. He says you're always judging him, and he just wants one day without any drama. He wants it to be about us." The words were Lisa's, but this sentiment was all Mark's. Mark, her perfect, charming fiancé with the polished smile and the eyes that never quite smiled with it. He had been systematically isolating her from her old life for a year, and this was his final triumphant move, cutting out her own mother. I didn't fight. I didn't scream or cry or beg. I simply looked at the daughter I had raised and saw a stranger echoing the words of a man I fundamentally did not trust. "I see," I had said, my dignity a thin, brittle shield. "Well, I wish you a very happy day, Lisa." She had fled my house as if escaping a fire, relieved that I had made it so easy for her. But she had mistaken my silence for weakness. She had mistaken my dignity for surrender. She, and Mark, had no idea that my silence was the most dangerous weapon I possessed. Because I knew something about Mark, a secret I had unearthed 3 months ago, thanks to a nagging suspicion and a very thorough private investigator. Mark had told Lisa, and everyone, that he was an orphan, his parents having died tragically in a car crash when he was a teenager. It was a sad story that garnered him immense sympathy. It was also a complete and utter lie. His parents were very much alive, living a quiet life in a small town in Oregon. They hadn't seen their son in 15 years, not since he had drained their retirement account and vanished, leaving them destitute. He had reinvented himself, crafted a new, tragic backstory, and charmed his way into my daughter's heart and my family life. I had sat on this information, hoping I would never have to use it, praying that my daughter would see through his facade on her own. But now, he had forced my hand. He wanted a day without drama? He wanted to start a new life with my daughter? Fine, but he would do it without the foundation of lies he had so carefully constructed. I walked to my antique writing desk. I took out a single sheet of my best cream-colored stationery and a fountain pen. My handwriting was steady as I wrote. The letter was not emotional. It was factual. It contained no accusations, only information. It detailed the names of his parents, their address in Oregon, and the phone number of the nursing home where his father now lives, suffering from Alzheimer's, his care paid for by Medicaid because his son had stolen his future. I printed a copy of the investigator's report, highlighting the section on the financial fraud charge that was quietly dropped when his parents couldn't bear to see their only son go to jail. I folded the 2 pages together and slid them into a crisp envelope. On the front, I wrote, "For Mark, to be opened after you say I do." I sealed it with a wax stamp, a small, final touch of formality. A few minutes later, my cousin Carol, who was on her way to the wedding, stopped by, as we'd arranged. I handed her the envelope. "It's my wedding gift," I said, my voice even. "Please make sure it gets to him personally, after the ceremony." She nodded, tucking the letter into her purse. As she drove away, I felt no satisfaction, only a grim, hollow sense of necessity. The bomb had been delivered, and I knew it was only a matter of hours before the explosion would reach my doorstep. I've only just begun this story, but believe me, it's about to get even more intense. Stay tuned to find out what happens when the devastating truth is finally revealed. The hours of my daughter's wedding day crawled by with an agonizing slowness. My house, usually a place of comfort, felt like a prison cell. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall was a reminder of a moment I was missing: the vows, the first kiss, the father-daughter dance she would be sharing with her new father-in-law. I didn't torture myself by looking at the dress I was supposed to wear, hanging pristine and silent in my closet. Instead, I sat in my favorite armchair, a book open on my lap, though I hadn't turned a page in over an hour. My mind was 5 miles away, a reluctant ghost at the celebration, hovering over the letter that lay in my cousin's purse like an unexploded bomb. Around 7 p.m., the first picture started to appear online. A distant niece, a prolific social media user, began posting to her feed. There was Lisa, my Lisa, looking breathtaking in her white gown, her smile wide and radiant. There was Mark, handsome and dapper in his tuxedo, his arm possessively around her waist. They were a picture-perfect couple. The comments section was a flood of congratulations and heart emojis. "So beautiful, perfect for each other, wishing you a lifetime of happiness." Each cheerful comment was a fresh stab of pain. They saw a fairy tale. I saw a tragedy waiting to happen. I saw my beautiful, naive daughter beaming next to a con man, completely oblivious to the rot hidden beneath his charming exterior. I tried to imagine the scene. My cousin Carol would find a quiet moment after the main toasts. She'd approach Mark, hand him the heavy cream-colored envelope, and say, "Your new mother-in-law asked me to give this to you. She said to open it when you have a moment alone." And then she would walk away. When would he open it? Would he be curious and open it immediately in a bathroom stall? Or would he wait until they were back in their honeymoon suite, the champagne opened, the night winding down? I pictured him, his tie loosened, finally sinking into a chair and breaking the wax seal. I imagined his confident smile faltering as he read the first few lines. I imagined the color draining from his face as he looked at the copy of the investigator's report, the highlighted sections detailing his real name, his living parents, and the fraud complaint. The perfect facade of his new life would crumble to dust in his hands. A part of me, the mother part that never truly dies, felt a pang of vicarious horror for him. His life was about to be irrevocably shattered. But the stronger part of me, the part that had been forged in the fire of his and Lisa's cruelty, felt nothing but a cold, hard sense of necessity. He had built his new life on a foundation of lies and on the wreckage of his own parents' security. He had charmed my daughter into abandoning the mother who had raised her. He did not deserve a fairy tale ending. He deserved the truth. And I knew my daughter. Once the initial shock and denial passed, her integrity, the one thing I know I successfully instilled in her, would force her to see the man for who he really was. The night was long and sleepless. I tossed and turned, the imaginary confrontation between Lisa and Mark playing out in my mind in a dozen different ways. I finally gave up on sleep around 5 a.m. and went downstairs to make coffee. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, a new day dawning on a world that felt fundamentally different. I sat at my kitchen table, nursing a hot mug, the silence of the house a heavy blanket. The bomb I had sent last night was surely gone off by now. All I could do was wait for the shockwave to reach me. I stared out the window at the quiet, peaceful street, my heart a tight, anxious knot in my chest. Then I heard it, a sound that ripped through the morning calm. The screech of tires as a car took the corner too fast, followed by the slam of a car door. And then, a frantic, desperate pounding on my front door. It had begun. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the house. For a moment, I considered not answering. I considered letting whoever was on the other side of the door pound until their knuckles were raw. But that wasn't my way. I had set this in motion, and I would see it through to the end. I unlatched the deadbolt, turned the knob, and pulled the door open. The sight that greeted me was somehow exactly what I had expected, and yet more shocking than I could have imagined. It was Mark, my new son-in-law. His perfectly tailored tuxedo was rumpled and stained, his bow tie undone and hanging crookedly around his neck. His usually immaculate hair was a mess, as if he'd been dragging his hands through it all night. But it was his face that stole my breath. It was pale, blotchy, and streaked with tears. His eyes, the same confident eyes that had dismissed me with such ease, were now red-rimmed and filled with a desperate, shattered panic. The groom was crying on my porch. He stumbled inside when I stepped back, practically collapsing into the armchair I had spent the night in. He put his head in his hands and his shoulders shook with ragged, gut-wrenching sobs. I didn't rush to comfort him. I didn't offer a soothing word. I simply closed the door and stood there, my arms crossed, watching him. I was a spectator to a demolition of his own making. After a minute of his incoherent weeping, I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of cold water, and set it on the table beside him. "Drink this, Mark," I said, my voice neutral. He looked up at me, his face a mess of tears and self-pity. "She knows," he choked out. "She knows everything." He drank the water in 3 desperate gulps, then began to speak, the words tumbling out of him and a frantic, disjointed confession. He told me he opened the letter in the honeymoon suite after Lisa had fallen asleep, exhausted from the day. He described reading my calm, factual words and seeing the evidence from the investigator. He told me how he had sat there in the dark for an hour, the truth a cold weight in his stomach. Then Lisa had woken up, saw his face, and asked what was wrong, and it had all come out. He confessed everything to me right there in my living room, the lies about his deceased parents, the stolen retirement money, the new identity he had crafted. He described Lisa's reaction, the initial disbelief turning to horrified revulsion. He told me how she had grabbed her own phone at 3 a.m. and called the number for his mother in Oregon, and how my daughter had sat there listening on speakerphone as a tired, broken woman on the other side of the country confirmed every last ugly detail of her son's betrayal. "She called me a monster, Carol," he sobbed, his voice cracking. "A ghoul who built his life on his parents' stolen future. She said she was looking at a complete stranger. She packed a bag. She told me to be gone by the time she got back from wherever she was going. She kicked me out on our wedding night." He looked at me then, his eyes pleading, pathetic. "It's over. My whole life, it's over." He was a man adrift, his carefully constructed ship having just smashed against the rocks of his own deceit. He lurched forward, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. "You have to help me," he begged, the words desperate. "You're her mother. She'll listen to you. Please, Carol, talk to her. Tell her I was stupid. Tell her I'll pay the money back, every penny. I'll do anything. Just tell her I love her. Tell her not to do this." The irony was so thick I could choke on it. The man who had orchestrated my banishment from their new life was now begging me to be the architect of its reconstruction. He was asking me, the woman he had deemed too critical and dramatic for his wedding day, to clean up the most dramatic mess of his entire life. I looked at him, at this weeping, broken man in my armchair, and I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction. Just a vast, empty calm. I had planted a seed of truth, and this was the harvest. It was not my job to save him from it. I let the silence stretch out, his desperate breathing the only sound in the room. Finally, I spoke, and my voice was quiet, queer, and final. "Why would I do that, Mark?" My question hung in the air between us, as stark and unforgiving as a block of granite. "Why would I do that, Mark?" I watched the last vestiges of hope drain from his face, replaced by the cold, stark understanding that he was utterly and completely alone. The well of my sympathy, the maternal instinct to fix and to soothe that he had relied on and abused, had run dry. He had no answer. Of course he didn't. There was no logical reason I should help the man who had orchestrated my public humiliation and broken my daughter's heart. He stared at me for a long moment, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish gasping for air. Then, with a final, shuddering sigh of defeat, he pushed himself up from the armchair, a man suddenly aged by a decade. He walked to the door, not looking back, and let himself out into the morning that no longer held any promise for him. After he was gone, I sank into the chair he had just vacated. It was still warm. I didn't feel the rush of victory I might have expected. There was no triumph in witnessing such a complete and pathetic collapse. There was only a profound, weary sadness. A sadness for my daughter, for the fairy tale that had turned into a horror story overnight. A sadness for the man-child who had just left my house, a person so hollow that he had to build a life out of stolen parts. And a sadness for myself, for the fact that I had been forced to deploy such a devastating weapon against my own family's happiness in order to save it. I made myself a fresh pot of coffee and sat at my kitchen table, watching the world go on outside my window, feeling a strange sense of detachment, as if I had just guided a storm to shore and was now simply waiting for the waters to come. The knock on my door later that afternoon was different. It was soft, hesitant, almost questioning. I knew who it was before I even opened it. When I did, my heart broke all over again. It was Lisa. She looked small and fragile, swallowed up by a large gray sweatshirt. Her eyes, usually so bright and full of life, were swollen and red from hours of crying. The joyful bride of yesterday was gone, replaced by this shattered ghost. She didn't say a word. She just looked at me, her lower lip trembling, and in her eyes I saw a lifetime of regret and a desperate plea for the one thing she knew she could always count on, her mother. I opened my arms, and she fell into them, clinging to me as she sobbed, her tears soaking the front of my shirt. I held her tightly, stroking her hair, just as I had when she was a little girl who had scraped her knee. We sat on the sofa for a long time, her head on my shoulder, the story pouring out of her between ragged breaths. She told me of her rage, her disbelief, and the sickening, icy dread she felt as she listened to Mark's mother on the phone, a woman she never knew existed. She kept calling him Maddie. His name is Matthew. He hasn't been Mark for very long. She looked up at me, her face a mask of shame. You knew, didn't you? You tried to warn me. I called you critical. I called you dramatic. I banned you from my wedding, Mom. How can you even look at me? I took her face in my hands, forcing her to meet my gaze. Lisa, look at me. I love you more than my own life. That has never and never will change. I wiped a tear from her cheek with my thumb. You did what you did not to hurt you, but because I could not stand by and watch you build your future on a foundation of lies. You deserved a husband who was real. You deserved the truth, no matter how ugly it was. My only regret is that the truth had to cause you this much pain. The dam of her composure broke again, but this time the tears felt different. They were the tears of a daughter who had finally come home. We talked for hours, untangling the web of lies Mark had spun. We cried together, and for the first time in a long time, we laughed a little too, a dark, bitter humor at the sheer audacity of his deception. As dusk began to settle outside, a new feeling began to replace the grief. It was resolve, a shared strength. I saw the fire return to my daughter's eyes. She was heartbroken, yes, but she was not broken. She was my daughter, and she was a fighter. I stood up from the sofa and took her hand, pulling her to her feet. All right, I said, my voice firm and clear. The pity party is officially over. He took your wedding day. We are not going to let him take another second of your life. I walked to the phone, my purpose clear. Now we fix this. I'm calling a lawyer, not just any lawyer. I'm calling the best divorce attorney in the state. We're not just ending this marriage, sweetheart. We're erasing it. We are on the verge of the climax. What happens now will turn everything upside down. You simply cannot miss the resolution of this story. The lawyer I called was a woman named Miss Davenport, a name spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence in the city's legal circles. She was a petite, impeccably dressed woman with eyes that could probably see right through concrete and a voice that made grown men sit up straight. We met her the next day in her intimidatingly minimalist office high above the city. Lisa sat beside me, pale but resolute. I laid out the entire story, complete with the private investigator's report. Miss Davenport listened without interruption, her face a perfect mask of professional neutrality. When I finished, she gave a single sharp nod. "This is not a divorce," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. "A divorce implies there was a valid marriage to begin with. There wasn't. This was a contract entered into under fraudulent pretenses. We will file for an annulment. We will have this entire sham erased from your record, Lisa." For the first time in days, I saw a flicker of real hope in my daughter's eyes. The legal machine, once set in motion, was terrifyingly efficient. Miss Davenport's office filed the petition for annulment based on fraud, and Mark was served with the papers. His response was predictable. The pathetic, weeping man was gone, replaced by a cornered, vicious animal. Through his own hastily hired lawyer, he responded by denying everything and demanding a substantial financial settlement for his emotional pain and suffering and a share of the assets Lisa had brought into their 24-hour marriage. It was a desperate, greedy cash grab, and it was the final nail in his own coffin. Miss Davenport simply smiled a thin, dangerous smile when she read his demands. "Good. He's arrogant. That will make this much easier." The final meeting took place a week later in a sterile conference room at Miss Davenport's firm. It was the first time Lisa had seen Mark since she'd walked out of their honeymoon suite. He sat opposite us, flanked by his lawyer, trying to project an aura of a wronged husband. He wouldn't look at me. My daughter, however, looked directly at him, her gaze clear and cold. Miss Davenport began the proceedings. "My client," she said, gesturing to Lisa, "is prepared to walk away from this situation with a clean and immediate annulment. She asks for nothing from your client, Mr. Mark, other than to be free of him." Mark's lawyer started to bluster about his client's rights and emotional distress. Miss Davenport let him finish. Then she calmly slid a file across the table. "Before we discuss settlements, I want to be sure we're all working with the same set of facts." Inside the file was everything. The investigator's report, a notarized statement from Mark's real mother in Oregon confirming the theft of their retirement funds, a copy of his real birth certificate with the name Matthew O'Connell, and finally a transcript of a conversation with the district attorney's office discussing the formal reopening of a 15-year-old fraud investigation. "As you can see," Miss Davenport continued, her voice dangerously soft, "your client has two options. Option A, he signs this annulment, disappears from my client's life, and we consider the matter closed. Or, option B, we present this file to the press and the DA, and your client can discuss his emotional pain with a cellmate. The choice is his." The color drained from Mark's face. His lawyer read the documents, his own professional composure crumbling with every page. He leaned over and whispered furiously to his client. Mark just stared at Lisa, his eyes filled with a new kind of terror. The con was over. The game was up. There was no escape. After a long, suffocating silence, he picked up the pen with a trembling hand and signed the annulment papers. His fake life, his perfect wedding, his chance at my daughter's future, all of it, erased with a single stroke of ink. He left the room without a word, a ghost leaving his own haunting. 3 months later, the sun was shining again. This time, it didn't feel like a cruel joke. It felt like a promise. Lisa and I were in my kitchen, the familiar scent of a roasting chicken filling the air. We were having our first Sunday dinner together since before the wedding. We talked and laughed, the easy, comfortable rhythm of our relationship slowly returning. The wounds were still there, but they were healing. After dinner, Lisa hugged me at the door. "Thank you, Mom, for everything, for not letting me stay married to a monster." I held her tight. "I would have burned down the world for you, sweetheart. I just did it with a lawyer instead." After she left, I stood by the window, watching her drive away, my heart full. The pain had been immense, but our bond, tested by lies and betrayal, had emerged stronger and more real than ever, and that was a foundation no man could ever break again.